Hello, I'm Gordon Now, and today I'll be giving a brief introduction on how to practice improvisation. Now, of course, improv may seem like a mysterious and a daunting subject, but it is something you could practice and something you can get better at. So, what should our goals be for practicing improv? Well, let's step back a moment and ask, what makes great improv? If you think of your favorite solo or any great solo, ask yourself, what do you like about it? You might say, it sounds good, it seems effortless, it's interesting, and maybe it makes sense. So let's take a closer look at each of these. First, it sounds good is a little bit too vague to be useful, but if we ask, what do we mean by it sounds good? We might say at the most basic level, it means there are good choices of notes, rhythms, and feel. In other words, notes which work well with the chords and follow the chord progression of the song, and rhythms and feels that work with what the rhythm section and the rest of the band is playing. So now the question is, how do we get to the point where we make good choices like that? And the answer is two things. First, knowledge. So theory knowledge about keys, chords, scales, chord progressions, and the song you're playing. And the second thing is skills. So the ability to hear and identify and respond to those same things. So to work on these things, of course, for knowledge, see the playlist down below for a list of theory lessons from SacJEF. And for skills, see the playlist of ear training videos. So second, it seems effortless. Often great solos seem so fluid and natural and responsive, and what they don't seem like is that the player is furiously thinking about chords and scales, because, spoiler alert, they're not. So to use an analogy, if I were speaking with you, but I were thinking about every single word and how to pronounce them, it would be very difficult for me to talk to you smoothly. Whereas if I know the words and I know how the language works and that knowledge is ingrained in me, then I don't have to actively think about those things, and I'm free to instead concentrate on what is important, namely what I want to say, the message, the meaning. And in the same way, one of our goals for practicing music and improv should be to know things like theory so well that we don't need to think about them, and instead we're free to concentrate on the more important things, like what you want to say with your music. Third, it's interesting. So again, what do we mean by this? Well, one thing might be there's not too much of any one thing, which would be boring. For example, if I talked like this and I never raised my voice and I never changed my expression forever and ever, it would get rather boring. But on the other side of the spectrum, if there's too much variety and things are getting crazy and up and down all the time and always unpredictable, then it would also get old pretty quickly. So in other words, interesting things have a balance. They have a balance of variety. And it turns out that this is something we can specifically practice in improvisation, that is, balance in improv and the use of contrasts. And this will be one of the video series I will be putting out for SacJEF. When that's started, the link will be in the description below. And finally, it makes sense. What do we mean by that? Well, for one thing, a great improviser is not just playing random independent notes, like I'm not just saying random words to you, but is instead linking them together into meaningful musical phrases, sometimes musical statements and responses. In other words, there's kind of an internal reasoning to the solo, and when we're listening, it's like we can follow along with the player's train of thought. So the prime way of creating this as an improviser is to work with small musical ideas called motifs, and to repeat those in order to create patterns. And as listeners, when we hear the patterns, it's automatically engaging because we almost automatically can't help but anticipate what comes next in the pattern. Will the pattern continue? Will it stop? Like if I say to you, the only thing I don't like about celery is the everything. That's kind of an example of the same principle in humor, of setting up an expectation and then doing the unexpected. So we can practice this kind of pattern building in improv by working on what's called motivic improvisation, or again, improv working with a motif, a small musical idea. So this will be the first series of improv videos I'll put out. Again, that will be linked below in the description. So there's our overview. How do we make our improv sound good? Well, we need the knowledge and the skills to make good choices. Second, how do we make it seem effortless and natural? Well, we have to learn those things so well that we don't have to actively think about them. Third, how do we make it interesting? Again, by practicing balance and balanced variety. And finally, How do we make it make sense? Well, for one, we can practice motivic improvisation and motif development. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the first videos on motivic improv and motif development.